YouTube. My name is Colby with Mechanics. Today we are looking at the 2004 Audi A4 1.8 Turbo. As you'll see in my previous video, we changed the cam chain tensioner trying to address the 11 service codes that we had in the system. That did help the timing out drastically. The car will actually run and stay running now, but we did come up with another issue. The car is now throwing multiple misfires on all 4 cylinders, and it's also throwing a lean code. After weeks, literally weeks of researching this, checking all the system, the check valves, the clamps, the hoses, we discovered that the mass airflow was actually the culprit in this situation. I couldn't find a video online that kind of related to this mass airflow, which is why I'm making this. And during this video, I'm going to touch on the check valves, the suction jet pump, the Pcv, and explain our process of how we found the issue and were able to correct it. So for now, let's go ahead and get started. Okay guys, where I started in this project was I just began cutting all of these factory hose clamps off of all the lines. All these check valves here have factory clamps. They're a pain in the butt. I used a pair of tin snips to snip them and went to the parts store and got a bunch of hose clamps. You're going to want to check all, it's a pain in the butt, it takes a long time, but cut all these clamps off and start checking all your fittings and hoses. On this particular vehicle, I believe we have 6 check valves. They look similar, well they are these guys right here. And the way to check these, if you look at them, there's a little arrow on the valve, and that's the direction of the flow. So you should only be able to blow through one direction, which sounds good. Now, however, on this valve, which I've already pulled, if you turn it around and blow the opposite direction, there's still air coming out. So this valve would be considered bad. We had 2 bad valves on this car, actually, and I've already replaced them. The valves on this engine, there's one over here by the diverter valve. It looks very deteriorated, but I've pulled it and checked it. It does work. One here. We have one here, right on top. This is your suction jet pump here, right on top of that. There is one directly below the suction jet pump, which is very hard to see. And there's also another one right below that, on this little line here. So there's 3 right in this area. With those 3, we have 2 more over here on the side. One here, and one guy right here. You're going to want to check all those, cut all those clamps off. On these, I was actually able to unhook the lines at the opposite ends, so I didn't have to take the clamps off and blow through them through the hoses, which saved me some time cutting the clamps and replacing the clamps. Most of these, actually I believe all of this system, all flow towards the intake. All the airflow goes in towards the intake. Next we're going to move on to the Pcv valve. Okay, as you're checking your check valves, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to check all of your vacuum hoses. There is a lot of vacuum lines on this particular engine, and from what I've read online, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Hoses split, T-fittings will crack, and that will create unmetered air coming into your engine, which is really going to throw your fuel off. Now, down here under this intake is the Pcv valve. That's the next thing we're going to look at. I was able to get this one out without removing the intake. It is kind of tight down there. However, to check this one, it's just a one-way valve like the check valves. I would plug all the holes except for one and make sure my flow only went one way. And I've already checked this one, and they all seem to be only flowing one way. Now on this Pcv valve, which is positioned just like this under this intake, this hose goes down to a thick elbow that goes into the block. That elbow is very common to crack or leak. There's an O-ring on the bottom, so you're going to want to check that very carefully. From here, there's a plastic tube that runs up and runs right to the base of this fitting right here. Check that as well. That plastic can actually crack and create a really bad vacuum leak. And this line here is just another rubber hose that you're going to want to check thoroughly to make sure there's no cracks or leaks in it. Okay, once you've determined your Pcv valve is operational or if you replaced it, another common issue that I discovered online after doing hours of research was the crankcase vent valve here, or the pressure regulator valve. I'm no expert at this Audi by any means. However, from what I read online, this is a very common problem, and they're very cheap to fix. So if you are having any idle issues or boost issues, or you think you may have a vacuum issue, go ahead and replace that. I think I got it for $20. And from what I read online, like I said, it has been a pretty common problem. As you're going through your whole system, like I said before, check all your lines. There's vacuum lines over here. I've read that the intake here on the turbo can crack open and leak, so you just need to jack the car up, get a good flashlight, and just go over every line, every fitting, and make sure that all your vacuum systems are sealed up and nothing's leaking. Now, we thought that was our initial problem. We thought this was our entire problem, was a vacuum issue. And once I had all the valves and everything checked, I hooked up my OBD2 scanner, which is a blue driver made by Lemur. And with this device, it's not a VAGCOM, which is usually used for VWs and Audi vehicles, which would have been a lot better. I didn't have one. I did have this OBD2 scanner. It does have a live feature to take live feeds, and I'm going to go ahead and show you what we discovered was actually more of the issue rather than the two check valves being bad, which was the mass airflow sensor. I'm going to go ahead and hook this blue driver up, get it Bluetooth to my phone, and show you exactly what we discovered. Okay, now what we discovered on my blue driver system here was I have the device hooked up to my phone via Bluetooth, and I'm going to go ahead and hit this live button, and I already set the parameters of what I want to look at. Now, what we discovered prior to changing this mass airflow was that this mass airflow rate, which right now is running at 4.5 grams per second, prior to me changing that mass airflow sensor, this mass airflow was up in the 7 to 8 grams per second range at idle, which was way too high. It was creating my short-term fuel trim to max out at 25% or more. The engine was trying to compensate for the air that it thought it was receiving when it really wasn't. The sensor was telling the computer it was getting more air than it actually was. Never once did this car throw a code for anything related to mass airflow. However, the mass airflow did end up being the problem. It was throwing the wrong reading. And thanks to this wonderful Blue Driver app, I was able to discover it, and with the help of Old Guy on AudiZine website. Okay, one more little note before we sign off here. During all my research online, I discovered that the engine coolant temperature sensor was a culprit that could create similar issues to this. On this particular device, I noticed yesterday that my temperature was jumping from the 90s to the 150s. So we may actually still have a temp sensor issue that I have to address. However, just for you to know, it's something to check out. If you check your mass airflow and it checks out properly, I would go ahead and take a peek at that coolant temperature sensor, because that could be the culprit. We're going to wrap up for today. If anybody has any questions, any further questions about this vacuum system or what I've shown today, please feel free to leave a comment on my page or this video. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, there's going to be more Audi videos coming. We have other issues we're going to address on this vehicle. And I appreciate you listening today, and until next time, have a great day.